Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's meeting. We're going to get started in just about 2 minutes, but in the meantime, we have a fun chat box question for you all. So we're curious to know, what organization are you with? Where are you from? And then just for fun, if you won the lottery, what is the first thing you would buy? So take a second to introduce yourself so we know who's in today's training, and then share what would be your first lottery purchase. And we'll get started in about 2 minutes. All right, everyone, that was so much fun. I love seeing your answers. We had lots of fun answers. It looks like we're going to need a real estate agent because a lot of us would be buying new homes, and a lot of us would be buying college funds for our loved ones, which I loved. And then Stacy, she is buying 10 hairless cats immediately, and I'm here for it. I have a neighbor and they have 2 Sphynx cats, and they are out of this world. So Stacy, I agree. Let's get some cats while we're at it. So that was just a fun way to start our meeting today. But if we haven't met before, my name's Dana Bryant. I'm the outreach officer here at Volunteer West Virginia, and I'll be leading today's webinar about our mini grant. We also have Moya. She's helping let people in and out of the waiting room. So if you get kicked out, we'll let you back in. And she's also going to be answering questions in the chat. So if you have any questions throughout today's training, you can put them in the chat or just wait until the end and we'll have a question and answer session for you all. So today's topic is all about our volunteer recognition mini grants. I'm so happy you all are interested. And what we're going to do today is just an introduction to the project. I'm going to share a little bit about the goals of the mini grant project and what this funding is going to be used for. And then you all are really lucky. I'm going to be sharing some application tips with you all. So things that'll help your application stand out and score higher. And then lastly, we're going to have time for questions at the end. We'll have plenty of time, so you can hold your question, or if you have a fairly easy self-explanatory question, you can put it in the chat box and Moya will answer it for you. And just to clarify, I'm going to send out this recording and the link to the slides after today's presentation, so you all will have all this information at your fingertips. So just a little introduction to our Volunteer West Virginia mini grant project. This funding is provided by Volunteer West Virginia, and our goal this year is to recognize all the wonderful volunteers in the state. So for this funding, it's going to help organizations develop new volunteer recognition programs. So if you've never recognized your volunteers formally, this is going to be perfect. You're a great candidate for this grant. Or if you're already recognizing your volunteers and you want to expand your program, this is also perfect. So if you're already doing it, know that you can use this funding to grow your volunteer recognition project. Organizations can request up to $500 to recognize your volunteers, and we're going to be celebrating and recognizing volunteers in September and October with this funding. So that's when you would need to plan for your project to take place. So why is volunteer recognition so important to begin with? Of course, you know, saying thank you is always very important, but you might be interested to know that thanking volunteers is actually a part of volunteer management, and it helps you retain your volunteers. So not only is it a very lovely thing to do, but it's a strategic part of your plan for your programs. So if you're working on developing your volunteer management program, this is perfect. You're in the right step. So you might be interested to know that volunteer management has 6 different steps. And the first one is you recruit your volunteers. You're going to get them in the door and bring them into your organization. And then you're going to process them and train them and get them up to speed, whether they're feeding members in your community or helping at the animal shelter. You're going to get your volunteers up and running, and then you're going to communicate and supervise them. And then after that, you're going to want to recognize all the time and energy that your volunteers put into your organization. And that's the end of the cycle. And what this does is it helps to retain your volunteers and keep them on board. Because I know a lot of people volunteer from the kindness of their heart, but it's good to celebrate all that they're doing, and it keeps your team motivated. So that's why this funding is so important. It's kind of rare to find funding for volunteer recognition, and that's why it's so important to us to be able to support and help your organizations. So that's where we're coming from, and that's just a little bit of our background to why we decided to do this project to begin with. Now, after all of that being said, there's so many great ways that you can recognize your volunteers. And I know a lot of you probably already have projects planned that you're thinking about, but if you're just curious, here's some of the things that we can fund with this funding. So you can do a beautiful recognition event for your volunteers and give them awards. I think this was a really neat project. They used plates. So these are all reusable plates, and they put the awards on the plates, and then they gave them to their volunteers, and then they're able to use them. So you can celebrate your volunteers with special awards to recognize their accomplishments. And then one tip we like to share is to recognize something special that each volunteer does. So really taking the time to sit down and reflect on how these volunteers are helping your team. You can develop a volunteer recognition program. So the last time we did this mini grant, the Beckley CERT team, they help with community emergency response and training. They developed a whole volunteer recognition program. And that's really great if you're just starting from the ground up, so you have a system in place. So this can be something as much as you want it to be. So you can do a volunteer of the month program, or do shout outs on social media, maybe make a bulletin board, you know, in your city hall or in your nonprofit office to recognize your volunteers. So this funding can be used to start a whole program, which would be excellent, because we want to help you continue to recognize your volunteers so you can retain them and keep them in your organization. You could do a thank you video. This is a really neat idea. Maybe you partner with a local videographer to record your volunteers and make a really nice message that you can share at a ceremony and then put out on social media to kind of recap everything that your volunteers have been doing. And you can use this just to share your overall impact. So if you want to have a really nice kind of banquet ceremony and make a video for your volunteers, your funding can be used for that. Thank you letters are my favorite. I'm old school. My mom always taught me to write a thank you letter for everything, so you can thank your volunteers. I love this idea because you can reach out to the communities that your volunteers serve and ask them to write thank you letters to your volunteers. So that adds a whole nother dimension to your project. If you're working, you know, in a drop-in shelter, maybe you have some of your clients write messages to your volunteers. Just a different way to think about it, but this funding can definitely be used to buy cards and paper to thank your volunteers and organize a thank you letter program. So that's one really good idea. And then we can also do volunteer appreciation gifts. And if you're going to do this, kind of tease it out, make it a whole package. I love the yard signs in these pictures. So the one on the left is a yard sign someone did, and it says an amazing volunteer lives here. And I love that because then you're going to get the word out about your volunteer program and recognize your volunteers. So this is a great way to recruit new volunteers. And I love the picture over on the right. This was from our last funding cycle that we did this a few years ago. And this is through 4-H, and they did thank you 4-H volunteer for their 50-year celebration. So I think yard signs are really cool. It's a great way to get the word out and have a visual impact for your community about what your volunteers are helping with. You can also do a really beautiful mug. We had a search and rescue team from Morgantown receive this funding last time, and they bought these really bright orange beanies for their volunteers to wear so they could be easily recognized when they're doing search and rescue in the forest and the wilderness there. So think about something that your volunteers might like to have, and you know, there's all kinds of cool ideas. That's why I'm sharing these different projects with you. So that's just a few ideas. I think this is a really nice program because it's easy to think of a nice way to thank someone, but those are just some examples that we like to share. And now that I have your head kind of around the creative part of your project, we're going to talk a little bit about application tips and just some more pragmatic ways and information you need to know when writing your grant application. So here are our top application tips. And if you haven't seen the grant application yet, it's on our website. It's very easy. It's a Survey Monkey. You're going to fill it out and send it to us. It's short, but you're going to want to put some thought and energy into it. And I say this because more thought out projects score higher, and then you'll have a better chance of being funded. So here's some tips for you all. My first tip would be read over the notice of funding opportunity carefully on our website. So if this is your first grant that you've applied for, or you might have applied for grants previously, they normally come with a notice of funding opportunity. That's NOFO for short, and that's where just all this information lives. That's all the nitty-gritty details that you're going to want to know. So the first step I would do would be to sit down, read the NOFO, and then apply for your grant. And that's super self-explanatory, but it's just a good first step. So when you read the NOFO, you're going to learn that organizations must be a registered West Virginia nonprofit organization, a local government, or a school to apply. So you're going to want to have one of those qualities to be able to apply for this grant. And if you don't have one, maybe you partner with your United Way to have a fiscal sponsor, or you might already have a fiscal sponsor. It's something for you to think about. Another tip that we like to share is organizations may receive one award. So we know you might have multiple programs, but you're just going to want to submit one grant application from your organization because you would only get funded for one. So that's just a good strategic plan, is that you can apply for one award for each one of your organizations. And then next up, you want to get creative. So these projects have all kinds of cute little titles, something that plans a beautiful, clear picture, you know, whether you're recognizing your volunteers as superheroes or, you know, just some cute twist. If you can get creative and give your project a catchy title and overall theme, that's going to really help when putting this together. And you're going to want to have fun. So this is a fun grant you get to apply for. You're going to want to plan a project that will make your volunteers feel appreciated and supported. So it should be a delight. It's not going to be a burden. And you're going to want to really paint a clear picture of your project and the application. So even if you're requesting t-shirts to recognize your volunteers, tell us why. Like, what's the plan with these shirts? Are you going to give them to your volunteers at a picnic or a training? You know, really make it clear, because I think when you're applying for a grant, you know inside what your project's going to be, but we don't know. So put as much detail and thought into your application as you can, so we can really understand what you're asking for. Once we receive all these grant applications, they're going to be ranked and scored, and they're just going to be scored on the application that you fill out. So you're going to want to make sure everything's spelled correctly, that it's well thought out and planned. And then when your projects are well thought out and explained well, they're going to score higher. So that's just something to consider, that all of these are going to be ranked and scored, and the highest ones are going to be the ones that get funded. You do a scoring rubric. So you're going to want to be really clear and just put a little bit of thought into it. And we have a few funding priorities for this. So what that means is you get bonus points for these. We'll prioritize grant applications that help organizations start a new volunteer program. So with this funding, we want to help people recognize their volunteers. So those will get a few bonus points, or that you're improving upon an existing event. So don't be put off if you recognize your volunteers. Just tell us how this is going to help you grow your capacity. We're doing a few bonus points for new grantees that have not been funded by a Volunteer West Virginia grant in the last 2 years. So that's one of our funding priorities, because we're always trying to help new people across the state. And then lastly, we're providing a few extra points if your programming takes place in the Appalachian Regional Commission's Distressed Counties list. And you'll see that on the grant application. It's just a list of counties. And if you serve one of those counties with your volunteers, you can check that off. So these are just a few funding priorities that we're focusing on this year to explain our process a little bit and how the grants will be ranked and scored. Next up, I'm going to talk about the budget. The budget is so important when you're writing a grant. So this isn't a super huge grant, it's $500, but we love it when applicants put a lot of thought and detail into it and kind of look at quotes and see how much money you'll need. So you're going to want to provide as much detail as possible with specific budget items. So sometimes in the past, we've received grant applications and they'll just say volunteer appreciation gifts, $500. That would be their whole budget. But we really want to know, what are you buying? So are you buying yard signs, mugs, thank you notes? So if you can tell us what you're going to be using with your $500, your application will be much more competitive. So something to think about. Even on the application, there's a way that we explain how to write it, whether it's like picnic shelter rental, $100, thank you notes, $200. So you're just going to itemize each thing and just kind of give a rough estimate. So this is a great tip. You want to get funded, put a little thought behind your budget and see how much things are going to cost. This is a reimbursement grant. So what that means is that you will be responsible for buying all the materials up front. And then once your project's completed, you're going to do a final report. It's not very long. It'll be just as long as the grant application. And then you're going to send us an invoice and then we'll pay you. It normally takes about a week or two. So it's not going to be a very long turnaround, but know that you're going to be responsible for buying the supplies up front, and then we'll reimburse you with a check once your project is completed. So something else that always makes grant applications stand out is the best investment. So make the best use of grant funds by acquiring donations to support your project. So if you have a local business donating the food, if you mention that, that's going to make your grant application stand out. It's by no means a requirement to have match or donations, but it is always nice to see, if items are being donated and you're being supported. And then consider the cost per volunteer. So what does that mean? So we'll look at your grant application. You're going to say how many volunteers you're going to recognize. So if you're requesting $500 to recognize your volunteers through appreciation gifts and you only have 4 volunteers, that's going to be a very high cost for volunteers. So kind of think about how much is this going to be per each volunteer. And that's not a deal breaker. But if you only have 2 volunteers, you can't really request $500 because they would be getting $250 in items. So that's just something that we do informally, which is a nice tip I like to share. So kind of consider the cost per volunteer when you're applying for this funding to make sure that it's reasonable. And then that ties really well into our unallowable expenses. So these are things that you cannot ask for funding for on your application. Please don't include them. And the first one would be food. So unfortunately, with this funding stream that we're using, we cannot buy meals or snacks or beverages or catering. And I know a lot of you might be wanting to do like recognition events, but you would need to get that donated or from your organization. So that's really our only stipulation with this grant, is that you cannot buy food, and then costs need to be necessary and reasonable for the project. That's just kind of what I went back to. If you're recognizing 2 volunteers, you can't really ask for $500. We can't do large gifts. They have to be small gifts. So those are the only 2 stipulations. So just remember, please don't request funding for food, and make sure that your costs are reasonable and necessary for this project. This is a great tip. Don't rush. So they're going to all be scored at the same time. So if you send in your grant application tomorrow or next week, it's no different to me. So don't rush, put some thought into your project. I always like to tell people this to, when you're writing it, put your answers in a Word document and save it as you go, and then copy and paste it into the SurveyMonkey as a tip we share, so that you can work on it and then submit it so you don't lose it, because the online form isn't going to save your application. So maybe start to write your answers in a Word document, copy and paste it, and submit it is something we like to recommend. Projects are not first come, first serve, so there's no rush. You can take your time, and you're going to have until August 20th to apply. And then after we get all the applications is when they will be ranked and scored. So take your time, put some thought into it. And then how to apply, it's really easy. You're going to go to our website, and you're going to see the grants tab, and you're going to download the notice of funding opportunity that we spoke a little bit about. It's basically all this information that I'm sharing today, but in one place. And then you'll find the link to the grant application there. So it's all on our website. You just need to download those 2 things. Now let's look at a few of the dates and deadlines you all need to know. And so applications will be accepted through August 20th. And then all the organizations will be notified by email on or by August 30th. So we'll let you know either way. If you're funded or not, we'll send you an email, or we'll let you know by August 30th. And then all your projects, if you are funded, will need to be completed by October 20th. And then your final report and invoice must be submitted before August 24th. And that's a pretty easy report. It won't take you too much time. And of course, we love for you to share pictures of your projects and your volunteers. We love to see how the funding is spent. So you're going to want to do that too. So the goal of this mini grant project is to keep it simple and easy and accessible. We're all about making things accessible here at Volunteer West Virginia. So the report and the invoice will be pretty accessible as well. So that was kind of an overview of the grant process. And like I said, I'm going to send out a recording of this training and these slides after today's call, and then all of this will be found in the NOFO. So we're just going to pause for questions and see if anyone has a question. Go ahead, put it in the chat box now, or unmute yourself. So I'll just give you all just a second.
Hey, Dana.
Hey, Josh.
Hey, I got a question.
Yeah.
So my idea for this, roughly, I haven't completely hashed it out, was trying to apply so that we would have some type of a gift, like you kind of mentioned, like tumblers or mugs or something, so that when we get volunteers, then we would have those available to give them out. But I wasn't thinking that we have X amount of volunteers right now, which we don't. It's always a rolling basis kind of. But that when we get them in the future, then to use the funding to buy things that we would have always on stock that we could hand out in recognition. Is that in line with this grant to do it that way?
Yeah, for sure, Josh. So if you have, 10, 15 volunteers now, but you have a goal of, bringing 10 more volunteers on by the end of the year, just let us know kind of what your thought process is behind it. It's okay if you buy some things for future volunteers, but I would just kind of outline that in your plan, and tell us that. So I think that would
Okay.
That's a good question.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Let's see.
I have a question.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. Last year, how many organizations did you fund?
This project took place in 2020, 2021. Okay, so it's been a while ago. Moya might remember, but I want to say between 30 and 40. Moya, please correct me if I'm wrong.
I think you're right, Dana. Last year, although it wasn't recognition, we funded 44.
Mm-hmm. So about 44. And then Moya, do you remember how many grant applications we received? I can't remember. Was it around 60?
Maybe 60, 65.
Thank you. That's what I thought. So last year we did mini grants for service projects. We received 60 and funded around 30 or 40, if that helps, guys. So you have a good chance if you submit a well-written application. Let's see, I'm just going to check these chat questions. Dina asked if there was a value for small gifts, and Moya said around $25. So that's the value for a small gift. And that would be an acceptable range to go up to for each person. And then Casey asked, could a volunteer recognition event be in conjunction with a new volunteer orientation? I don't see why not, for sure.
I have a question.
Yeah.
We have a lot of volunteers. I'm with One Unique Recovery House in Buchanan, and we were previously funded for a mini grant last year for you guys. So I was super excited to see this come open this year. For our recognition, we do have several volunteers, like a volunteer staff per se, but we also have other like community outreach programs that partner with us and work with us and literally provide us so much. So would it be acceptable to include them in our volunteer staff, even though they are with a separate organization? They're just in partnership with us?
I think, and it's good to hear from you, Megan. I remember you from last year. If it's a person that's volunteering their time freely and not getting paid for it, then they definitely could be included in that. If they're partner organizations, is kind of the way I think about it. So if it's someone volunteering their time and they're not getting paid, then I would include them for sure.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome. Let's see. I'm going to read a few of these in the chat, and then I'll let you all unmute if you have it. I'm sorry if these are redundant. Abigail asked if you could use the funds for a rental fee, like if you want to recognize your volunteers at a picnic shelter or a community center. Absolutely, you can use that as one of your expenses. So, and then, hey, Lexus, she's asking if AmeriCorps volunteers are considered as volunteers for this project. Yes, if they're a volunteer, they're considered for this project, regardless if they receive a living stipend or not. And then Jeremy asked, and then we'll unmute ourselves, are certifications or training qualified expenses? Jeremy, I'd have to see a little bit more about what you're thinking. And how that would be recognizing your volunteers. You can unmute yourself if you want to explain.
So we train certain members of our campus community on QPR suicide prevention training. So that has a cost that bears with it for the training and certification. And we also provide those students with bandanas to identify them as QPR trained individuals. So those would all fall under training costs. Just wondered what your thoughts were.
I would have to say, if it's something you're already doing, Jeremy, I don't know if this could cover it. You would have to explain how this is kind of elaborating on it, but I wouldn't necessarily put the training in as a recognition, even though it's super important. I love that, and I love the bandana. I think that's so important. But I don't think you can necessarily put the training in as a volunteer recognition piece. So it would have to be something just a little bit different, Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Jeremy. Let's see. Carla asked, would purchasing a machine to make tumblers or buttons be acceptable? I don't see why not. I love that idea, making some buttons for your volunteers. I would just explain how you're going to make that into a recognition project that's going to carry through. So maybe you buy the button maker, but every year you're going to hand out new buttons. just kind of elaborate on that, Carla. And that could be an expense, a tumbler maker or a button maker. Just kind of tell us how that's going to fold into a volunteer recognition program or project. These are great questions. Anyone want to unmute?
Hi all.
Hey, Abigail.
I have a question on the budget. Do you have any specific way the budget needs to be presented? I haven't read the NOFO. Does it need to be Word? Does it need to be Excel or just some simple calculations?
That's a good question, Abigail. I bet a lot of people are wondering. When you do your application, it's kind of just a text box and there's an image of how we'd like it presented. So you'll see it on there when you go to fill it out. There's the example and you just put it in that text box in the online form. And the budget's like pretty easy. For example, you would do like buttons, comma, $100, picnic shelter rental, comma, $100, certificates, comma, $100. So it's just like that. You just list it and then do a comma and then an estimate of how much each item would be, and then make sure it adds up to your total. So good. I see your thumbs up. I think you got it.
Oh, I have another question. I cover several counties with what we do with the VITA and Earned Income Tax Assistance Program, where we're doing free taxes for low income and senior individuals. So I'll have two recognition events that I'm looking to have covered by one budget. So I would probably need to break it down into this picnic shelter in Moorfield and this one in Martinsburg, that sort of thing, to show, even though it's one organization, just because geographically it's really difficult to get two sides of the mountain together.
Yeah, that's a good question. Thanks, Kat. Yeah. So you would just like you said, you could do, we're planning 2 events since our volunteers are located across the state. One's going to be in Lewisburg, one's going to be in Moorfield. And just explain that in the budget. And then you would just do 2 separate budgets in the same text box. You know what I mean? But I'm glad you explained it. That makes sense. And I bet some people are in the same situation. So if you need to have 2 events because you're across the state, that's fine. Just make sure you explain that and then just kind of parcel it out in the budget. That's a great question. Amy asked, I work with youth. Would something like a trip to an amusement park be allowed? Maybe. Apply for it. Last time we funded volunteers from a museum. They traveled and they went to another museum. So these museums, I want to say, were from the Cockney House in Moundsville, Glendale, and we funded for them to go to the museum near Leonard House at Ireland. I'm kind of making up some of these details. So, and that was like a program overlap. So Amy, if you make a good case for it, we've done projects like that in the past. It would just explain how the thought that goes into it and the experience that would provide to those volunteers.
Dana, could I just add to that? Are the youth the volunteers?
Yeah.
So they would have to be the volunteers that were being rewarded.
Good point. Yeah. Thanks, Moya. Yeah, it'll be for the youth volunteers for your group. But if you make a good case, we can consider that. For sure, we've done it in the past. Dina asked, would sponsoring a volunteer for a conference as a thank you be considered? I don't know. That one's a little bit more complicated. I'd have to see. I didn't have to really see. I'd have to see that application to see what that would be. You know, I don't know. I could go either way on that. But if that's what your heart's calling, just explain it really well, and we'll consider that for sure.
Could I just provide just a couple details real quick?
Yeah.
So it's a student volunteer who just graduated, who's working for us on an educational project, and I'd like them to go to present about the results they are impacting teachers and students. So that's what I'm just trying to find a way to thank her by taking her to this conference and letting her present. That's kind of the thought.
Yeah. I don't know. in the past, most of these have been for funding for like a group of volunteers. So we haven't really done any fundings for like one person, if that helps. You know,
And I think, Dana, that, you know, the cost, I'm assuming, Deanna, would be more than $25, and we would just be recognizing one volunteer. So when people looked at scoring that application, it might not come out as high. That's my thought process anyway.
thanks, Moran. That's a good way
Thank
to
you.
explain it. That's a good way to explain it. Good question. Let's see, other questions is pretty informal. Let me look through your faces. See if anyone looks like they're gonna unmute. All right. Anyone else in the chat? Thanks, Melissa. Well, I hope this helps. This is a fun project. So please, whatever your ideas are, please submit them. We'll consider everything. Like Moya said, they're all going to be scored. So that's where the strategy comes into place. So go ahead. We like different projects. And thank you all for coming and for being so kind to your volunteers and even considering to do this. So we're really excited to see your grant applications. And if you have any questions in the meantime, please email them to the grant inbox that's on the NOFO and we'll answer them. So thank you all so much. I'll see you all soon.
Thank you.
Thank
Well-
you.
Bye.